My name is Layla Hall. I'm 32 years old, and for over a decade, I was kicked out of family photos for years. Then I discovered the shocking secret that changed everything. I stood right there at every birthday party, every holiday dinner, every family gathering, smiling and trying to belong. But when those pictures were printed and hung on the walls, I was nowhere to be found. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't because I blinked at the wrong moment. Someone was deliberately erasing me from my own family's memory, and the reason behind it was more twisted than I could have ever imagined. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home, like you were there but not really there? If you've experienced that gut-wrenching feeling of being excluded by the people who are supposed to love you most, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what I'm about to share will show you that you're not alone in this pain. I want to hear your story too, so drop a comment below and let's connect over our shared experiences. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I brushed it off as paranoia. My mom, Patricia, had just posted pictures from my younger sister Emma's college graduation on Facebook, and I scrolled through every single one, looking for myself in the crowd. I was there that day. I remembered wearing my blue dress and standing right next to Emma when she threw her cap in the air. But in those 63 photos my mother shared with the world, I appeared in exactly 2 of them, barely visible in the background, half my face cut off by someone's shoulder. My brother Daniel was in almost every shot. My dad Richard had his arm around Emma in at least 20 pictures. And even my Aunt Carolyn, who flew in last minute, was featured more prominently than I was. But here's the thing that really got to me. In the family portrait we took that day with the professional photographer, the one where we all stood together in a perfect line, I was standing right there between my parents. But that photo never made it to social media or the family album. Something dark was happening behind those smiling faces, something I couldn't quite name yet. My heart started racing as I went through old photo albums in my childhood bedroom, flipping page after page and seeing the pattern repeat itself throughout my entire life. Christmas mornings where my siblings' excited faces filled the frames but I was mysteriously absent. Vacation photos where somehow the camera always seemed to miss me. Family portraits where I was positioned at the very edge and later cropped out when the picture was framed. I felt sick to my stomach because this wasn't just about photographs. This was about being systematically erased from my family's story, removed from the narrative like I never existed at all. The worst part was that I had no idea why they were doing this to me, what I had done to deserve this silent treatment, this visual rejection that cut deeper than any words could. You won't believe what I discovered when I finally confronted them about it. But first, I need to take you back to where this all really began. Growing up as the middle child in the Hall family, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying desperately to earn the same affection and attention that seemed to flow so naturally to my siblings. Emma was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, the cheerleader with perfect grades who made them proud at every turn. Daniel was the charismatic son, the funny one who could charm his way out of any trouble and always had my dad laughing at his jokes. Then there was me, Layla, the quiet one, the sensitive one, the one who somehow never quite measured up no matter how hard I tried. I spent my childhood trying to figure out the secret formula to making my parents look at me the way they looked at Emma and Daniel, but that formula never revealed itself. If you know what it feels like to be the forgotten child in your own family, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because your feelings are valid and your story matters. Have you ever felt like you were competing for love that should have been freely given? Tell me in the comments. The emotional atmosphere in our house was strange in a way I couldn't articulate as a kid. On the surface, we looked like the perfect American family. Nice house in the suburbs, 2 cars in the driveway, annual vacation to the beach, Sunday dinners around the table. But underneath that glossy exterior was a current of tension that I could always feel buzzing in my bones, especially when it came to me. My mother, Patricia, would criticize the way I dressed, the way I styled my hair, the friends I chose, the hobbies I pursued, always with this disappointed tone like I was a project that kept failing. My father, Richard, was more subtle in his rejection. He simply wasn't there emotionally, never asking about my day or showing up to my school events, always too busy with work or too tired to engage. Meanwhile, Emma got praised for everything, and Daniel got away with everything, and I got nothing. I remember being 12 years old and winning 2nd place in the school science fair with a project I'd worked on for months. I was so proud of that ribbon, so excited to show my parents, imagining their faces lighting up with joy and approval. When I burst through the front door holding up my award, my mother glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds before saying, "That's nice, honey, but Emma just made the varsity cheerleading squad as a freshman. Isn't that amazing?" My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. That moment crystallized something for me. The realization that no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough to make me visible to them. But what I didn't know then was that this emotional neglect was just the beginning. And the photo exclusion was part of a much larger, more sinister pattern that would take me years to fully understand. The moment everything clicked into place happened on a random Tuesday afternoon when I was 24 years old, sitting in my tiny apartment scrolling through social media like millions of other people do when they should be working. My mother had posted a huge album from our family reunion that past weekend. The one where all the aunts, uncles, and cousins gathered at my parents' house for a barbecue that lasted all day. I was there. I helped set up the tables. I brought the potato salad everyone complimented. I played with my little cousins in the backyard, and I distinctly remember laughing so hard my stomach hurt when Uncle Jim told that embarrassing story about Daniel's prom night. But as I scrolled through those 47 photos my mother posted with the caption, "Blessed with the best family," I felt my blood run cold because I wasn't in a single one. If you've ever had that moment where reality shifts and you suddenly see the truth you've been blind to for years, smash that like button and subscribe because what comes next will blow your mind. Have you ever discovered something about your family that made your whole childhood make sense in the worst possible way? I sat there staring at my phone screen for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, my hands shaking as I went back through the photos again and again, zooming in on the backgrounds, searching desperately for even a glimpse of my blue shirt or my dark hair in the corner of a frame. There were pictures of Emma holding her new baby, pictures of Daniel with his girlfriend Sarah, pictures of my dad manning the grill with a beer in his hand, pictures of my mom surrounded by her sisters, pictures of cousins I barely knew, even pictures of neighbors who had wandered over from next door. The neighbors made it into the family photo album, but I didn't. My cousin Rebecca, who I hadn't seen in 5 years, was tagged in multiple photos. My brother's girlfriend, who had only been dating him for 3 months, was featured prominently. But me, the actual daughter who had been there the entire time, I was a ghost. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest, making it hard to breathe, because this wasn't an accident or an oversight. This was deliberate, systematic erasure, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it anymore. I went back through years of my mother's Facebook posts, my father's rare social media updates, even my siblings' accounts, and the pattern was undeniable and heartbreaking. Family vacation to the beach 3 years ago where we spent a whole week together. 22 photos posted, I appeared in one where you could barely see half my face. Christmas morning 2 years ago, where I had saved up for months to buy everyone thoughtful presents. 38 photos, I was in the background of 2, blurry and unrecognizable. My grandmother's 80th birthday party where I had organized the whole surprise celebration, 61 photos, and I had been completely edited out of the group shots or simply excluded from the frame entirely. I felt like I was in a horror movie where I was being slowly deleted from existence. And the worst part was that everyone else in my family seemed to be in on it, or at least complicit in their silence. After that devastating discovery, I became obsessed with finding answers, with understanding why my own family would do something so cruel and twisted to me. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as my mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe I was just unphotogenic and they didn't want me ruining their perfect pictures. Maybe I had done something terrible that I couldn't remember, and this was their way of punishing me. Maybe I was adopted, and they resented me for not being their biological child. The explanations I came up with got more and more desperate and far-fetched as the hours passed, because the truth was too painful to face. That maybe they just didn't love me, that maybe I was fundamentally unlovable, that maybe there was something so wrong with me that even my own parents couldn't stand to look at pictures of me. If you've ever blamed yourself for the way your family treated you, give this video a like and hit subscribe, because you need to hear this. It was never your fault, and together we're going to unpack why families do this to their own children. What would you do if you discovered your family was erasing you from their memories? The next day, I decided to confront my mother directly, figuring that if I just asked her about it calmly and rationally, she would explain that it was all a misunderstanding, or give me some reasonable answer that would make everything make sense again. I called her on my lunch break, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I tried to keep my voice steady as I said, "Mom, I noticed I'm not in any of the photos you posted from the reunion last weekend." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, long enough that I thought maybe the call had dropped. And then she laughed, actually laughed, and said in this dismissive tone, "Oh, Layla, you're being so dramatic. You were probably just in the bathroom every time someone took a picture." When I pressed further, mentioning that this seemed to be a pattern over years of family events, her voice turned cold and she said, "I don't have time for this conversation right now. I have to go pick up your sister from yoga. We'll talk later." She never called me back to talk later. I tried approaching my father next, catching him on his way out of the hardware store one Saturday morning, asking him point blank why I was never in family photos. Richard looked uncomfortable, shuffling his feet and avoiding eye contact like a kid caught stealing cookies, and mumbled something about not really paying attention to who was in pictures, and it probably didn't mean anything. "Ask your mother," he finally said, which is what he always said when confronted with anything emotional or difficult, passing the responsibility to Patricia like he had been doing my entire life. When I tried to talk to Emma about it, she got defensive immediately, accusing me of being jealous of her and trying to start drama for attention. Daniel just shrugged and said, "I don't know, Layla. Maybe you just don't photograph well. Why are you making such a big deal about this?" The gaslighting was so thick I could barely breathe, and I started questioning my own sanity, wondering if maybe I really was overreacting, if maybe this really was all in my head like they were suggesting. The silence from my family after I tried to confront them about the photo exclusion was somehow worse than any harsh words they could have thrown at me. For weeks after those conversations, nobody called, nobody texted, nobody reached out to check if I was okay or to continue the discussion I had started. It was like I had committed some unforgivable sin by simply asking why I didn't appear in family photos, like I had broken an unspoken rule that everyone else knew about but me. The silent treatment is a form of psychological warfare that slowly eats away at your sense of self, making you question everything you know to be true. Every day that passed without hearing from them felt like confirmation that I really was the problem, that maybe I really didn't deserve to be included in their picture-perfect family narrative. If you've ever experienced the crushing weight of being ignored by people who are supposed to love you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because your pain is real and I want you to know that you're not alone in this fight. How long have you carried the weight of family silence and what did it cost you? My self-esteem, which had never been particularly strong to begin with, completely crumbled during those silent weeks and months. I started obsessing over every interaction I'd ever had with my family, replaying conversations in my head and analyzing them for clues about what I had done wrong. Maybe I had been too sensitive as a child, too needy, too emotional in a family that valued stoicism and strength. Maybe I had said something offensive years ago that I couldn't remember, something so terrible that they all decided collectively that I didn't deserve to be acknowledged. Maybe my face really was just that unpleasant to look at. Maybe there was something physically wrong with me that made them uncomfortable. The thoughts spiraled darker and darker, feeding on themselves like a fire consuming oxygen, until I could barely look at myself in the mirror without feeling disgust and shame. I started withdrawing from other relationships too, convinced that if my own parents and siblings couldn't love me, then surely nobody else would want me around either. My best friend Jessica noticed I was pulling away and called me out on it one night over dinner, asking me what was going on and why I had been canceling plans and avoiding her calls. When I finally broke down and told her everything, about the photos, about the confrontations, about the silence, she looked at me with such genuine shock and anger on my behalf that I almost started crying right there in the restaurant. "Layla, that's not normal," she said, gripping my hand across the table. "That's emotional abuse and you don't deserve that." But hearing her say those words, emotional abuse, made something inside me resist, because accepting that label meant accepting that my family was deliberately hurting me and I wasn't ready to face that truth yet. Little did I know that Jessica's words would be the first crack in the wall of denial I had built around myself, and that crack would eventually bring the whole thing crashing down. As the months went by without resolution or acknowledgement from my family, I started noticing other patterns I had somehow missed or rationalized away my entire life. The photo exclusion wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the most visible symptom of a much deeper dysfunction that had been festering in the Hall family for decades. I began keeping a journal where I documented every interaction with my parents and siblings, writing down the things they said and did, looking for evidence that would either prove or disprove my growing suspicion that I had been scapegoated since childhood. The entries painted a disturbing picture of favoritism, manipulation, and systematic devaluation that I could no longer ignore or explain away. My mother would call Emma 3 times a week just to chat, but she hadn't called me once since our conversation about the photos 4 months ago. If you're starting to see patterns in your own family dynamics that make you question everything you thought you knew about love and loyalty, smash that like button and subscribe because we're about to go even deeper into this rabbit hole. What patterns have you noticed in your family that nobody else seems to see? I started testing my theory in small ways, like sending a group text to the family chat asking if anyone wanted to grab dinner that weekend, and watching to see who would respond. Emma would reply within minutes to any message my mother or Daniel sent, but my messages would sit there unread for hours or days, sometimes never getting a response at all. When I posted something on social media, my family members who were supposedly so active online would scroll right past my updates without a like or comment, while showering Emma's posts with heart emojis and enthusiastic comments. I mentioned to my dad that I had gotten a promotion at work, something I had worked incredibly hard for, and he said, "That's nice," and immediately changed the subject to ask if I had heard about Daniel's new car. The lack of genuine interest or celebration in my accomplishments, combined with the over-the-top praise my siblings received for basic life activities, confirmed what I had suspected but been too afraid to admit. The worst part about finally seeing the truth was realizing how many years I had wasted trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it to me. I had bent myself into impossible shapes trying to be the daughter they wanted, the sister they could be proud of, and none of it had mattered because the rejection had never been about me. It was about them and their need for a scapegoat, someone to blame for all the dysfunction they refused to acknowledge in themselves. I felt angry at them for treating me this way, but I also felt angry at myself for accepting it for so long, for believing their narrative that I was somehow defective or unworthy. Trust is such a fragile thing, and once it's broken by the people who are supposed to protect you when you're most vulnerable, it becomes almost impossible to fully trust anyone again. But what I discovered next would make everything I had uncovered so far pale in comparison, and it would finally give me the answers I had been desperately seeking about why they had chosen me as their target. The truth came crashing down on me like a tidal wave on a cold November evening when I was visiting my Aunt Carolyn, my mother's younger sister who had always been kind to me in a distant, cautious sort of way. We were sitting in her living room drinking tea, and I had just mentioned casually how strange it was that I never seemed to appear in family photos, half expecting her to dismiss my concerns like everyone else had. Instead, her face went pale and she set down her teacup with shaking hands, and after a long moment of painful silence, she said, "Layla, honey, I think it's time someone told you the truth about why your mother treats you the way she does." My heart stopped beating for what felt like a full minute as I waited for her to continue, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, wondering what this family secret could possibly be, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what I'm about to tell you is going to shock you as much as it shocked me. Have you ever discovered a family secret that explained years of pain and confusion? Aunt Carolyn took a deep breath and told me that when my mother Patricia was pregnant with me, she had been going through a terrible time in her marriage to my father Richard. They had been fighting constantly, on the verge of divorce, and my mother had briefly left him and stayed with a coworker named Michael, who she had developed feelings for during that separation. When she found out she was pregnant, she panicked because she wasn't entirely sure if I was Richard's child or Michael's, and the timing made it impossible to know without a paternity test. She decided to go back to Richard and never told him about the affair or her uncertainty about my paternity, choosing instead to pretend everything was fine and hope that I would look enough like Richard that no one would question it. But as I grew older, I started developing features that didn't match anyone in the Hall family. My darker hair when everyone else was blonde, my different facial structure, my height that towered over both my parents and siblings. Your mother has never been able to look at you without being reminded of her betrayal and her guilt, Aunt Carolyn said with tears in her eyes. And instead of dealing with her own shame and getting that paternity test to know for sure, she chose to punish you for simply existing and being a reminder of the worst time in her life. The room spun around me as I processed this information, understanding suddenly why I had always felt like an outsider, why my mother could never fully love me, why she had systematically erased me from family photos and memories. It wasn't because I was defective or unlovable. It was because every time she looked at me, she saw her own mistakes and couldn't handle the weight of that guilt. My father had apparently suspected the truth for years, but had chosen willful ignorance over facing the possibility that I might not be biologically his. And my siblings had absorbed my mother's treatment of me as normal, learning to exclude and devalue me just as she did. The shocking secret wasn't just about my possible paternity. It was about the decades of emotional abuse that my mother had inflicted on me to protect herself from her own conscience. And that realization left me absolutely devastated. After Aunt Carolyn's revelation, I spent weeks in a fog of grief and anger, mourning not just for the childhood I had lost, but for the person I could have been if I hadn't spent my entire life believing I was fundamentally flawed and unworthy of love. I started researching emotional abuse and scapegoating in families, reading article after article and book after book about narcissistic family dynamics, and how parents sometimes sacrifice one child's well-being to protect their own fragile egos. Everything I read described my life with painful accuracy: the constant criticism disguised as concern, the withholding of affection and approval, the gaslighting when I tried to address problems, the triangulation where family members were turned against me, and yes, the symbolic erasure through photo exclusion. The most devastating part was realizing that this pattern of abuse had been so normalized in my family that even I hadn't recognized it as abuse until someone literally spelled it out for me. If you're starting to recognize your own experiences in this story and you're ready to learn how to break free from this cycle, please subscribe and hit that like button because the next part of my journey might just save your life the way it saved mine. When did you finally put a name to what your family was doing to you? Research shows that exclusion and ostracism can actually light up the same pain centers in the brain as physical injury. And when that exclusion comes from your own family during your formative years, the damage runs incredibly deep. I had spent my entire adult life struggling with depression and anxiety, never feeling good enough no matter what I accomplished, always waiting for people to discover the fatal flaw that would make them reject me just like my family had. I had sabotaged relationships with wonderful partners because I couldn't believe anyone could genuinely love me, and I had stayed in my mediocre job far longer than I should have because I didn't think I deserved better. All of those self-destructive patterns could be traced directly back to the emotional abuse I had suffered at my mother's hands. Abuse that she had justified to herself as somehow being my fault for being born under complicated circumstances. The hardest pill to swallow was accepting that my mother had chosen to protect herself rather than protect me, her innocent child who had done nothing wrong except exist. She could have gotten a paternity test when I was born and dealt with whatever the results were like an adult. She could have gone to therapy to process her guilt and shame. She could have made peace with her past mistakes and loved me regardless of my biological origins. Instead, she had turned me into the family scapegoat, a convenient target for all her negative emotions, someone she could blame and punish and erase without having to face her own culpability. My father was equally guilty for his passive complicity, choosing to ignore the obvious signs of favoritism and emotional abuse because confronting it would have meant examining his own marriage and his own willingness to bury uncomfortable truths. But understanding the psychology behind their behavior didn't excuse it, and it didn't erase the decades of damage they had done to my sense of self. And I knew that I had a choice to make about what happened next. Armed with the knowledge of why my family had treated me the way they did, I started seeing how deeply their rejection had infected every other relationship in my life like a poison spreading through my veins. My romantic relationships had always been disasters. I would fall hard and fast for anyone who showed me even basic kindness, mistaking their normal human decency for extraordinary love because I had been so starved for affection. Then I would become clingy and anxious, constantly needing reassurance that they weren't going to leave me, which of course pushed them away and confirmed my deepest fear that I was unlovable. My longest relationship had been with a guy named Marcus who I dated for 3 years, and looking back now, I could see that he had been emotionally unavailable and sometimes cruel, but I had stayed because I thought that was the best I deserved. When he finally broke up with me, telling me I was too much and too needy, I had spiraled into depression for months, believing he was right about me. My friendships weren't much better, even though I had managed to maintain a few close connections like my friendship with Jessica. I was always the one reaching out, always the one making plans, always the one apologizing even when conflicts weren't my fault, because I was terrified of being abandoned again. I would go out of my way to help friends with their problems, dropping everything to be there for them. But when I needed support, I would minimize my own struggles and pretend everything was fine, because I didn't want to be a burden. The scapegoat role I had been forced into as a child had taught me that my needs didn't matter, that my purpose was to serve others and absorb their negative emotions, and I had carried that toxic programming into all my adult relationships. I attracted people who were happy to take advantage of my giving nature without reciprocating, and I pushed away the healthy people who actually wanted mutual, balanced friendships. The worst part was how the photo exclusion specifically had made me avoid cameras and social situations where pictures would be taken. I would volunteer to be the photographer at events so I had an excuse not to be in the photos, or I would make myself scarce when people started pulling out their phones for group shots, unconsciously reinforcing my family's message that I didn't deserve to be visible or remembered. When friends posted pictures on social media, I would obsessively check to see if I was included, and if I wasn't, I would spiral into anxiety and self-hatred, even though it was probably just a coincidence. I had internalized my mother's treatment of me so deeply that I had become complicit in my own erasure, hiding from cameras and avoiding being seen because some part of me believed that I really didn't belong in other people's happy memories. But the day I recognized this pattern was the day everything started to change, and I began the long, painful journey toward reclaiming my right to exist fully and visibly in the world. The turning point came on a Saturday morning about 3 months after Aunt Carolyn had told me the truth, when I was sitting in a coffee shop journaling about everything I had learned and suddenly had a thought that stopped me cold. I didn't have to accept their narrative anymore. For my entire life, I had been living according to the story my mother had written about me, the story that said I was the problem child, the difficult one, the one who didn't quite fit, the one who didn't deserve to be loved or seen or remembered. But that story was a lie, a fiction she had created to protect herself from her own guilt and shame, and I had the power to reject it and write a new story where I was the hero instead of the victim. The moment I realized I could choose freedom over their toxic family system was the moment my life truly began. And if you're ready to make that same choice for yourself, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what comes next is going to show you exactly how to break free. What would your life look like if you stopped living according to someone else's cruel narrative about who you are? I sat there in that coffee shop with tears streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief and liberation, because I finally understood that my mother's inability to love me had nothing to do with my worthiness, and everything to do with her own brokenness. A healthy parent doesn't punish a child for their own mistakes, doesn't systematically erase them from family memories, doesn't turn siblings against them as a scapegoat for family dysfunction. What Patricia had done to me was a reflection of her character, not mine. And recognizing that fundamental truth was like having chains fall off my body that I hadn't even realized I was wearing. I thought about all the years I had wasted trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it, all the energy I had poured into being perfect and acceptable and invisible, and I felt a white-hot anger rise up in me, not the destructive kind of anger that tears things down, but the purifying kind that burns away everything false and leaves only truth behind. I made a decision right there in that coffee shop that was going to change the trajectory of my entire life. I was going to stop seeking my family's approval and start seeking my own happiness instead. I was going to establish firm boundaries with them and enforce consequences when those boundaries were violated, even if it meant reducing or eliminating contact. I was going to start therapy to process the trauma they had inflicted and learn healthy relationship patterns. I was going to take selfies and post them proudly on social media, reclaiming my right to be seen and visible. I was going to stop making myself small and quiet and convenient for people who didn't value me. I was going to build a chosen family of people who could love me the way I deserved to be loved, fully, openly, without conditions or reservations. The recognition of my own freedom was just the beginning, because knowing you can be free and actually doing the hard work of breaking free are two very different things, and the journey ahead was going to test every ounce of strength I had. The first boundary I decided to set was around the holidays, which had always been the most painful time of year for me because they highlighted everything that was wrong with my family dynamic. Thanksgiving was coming up in a few weeks, and for the first time in my 32 years of life, I called my mother and told her I wouldn't be attending the family dinner. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening, and then Patricia said in that cold, controlled voice she used when she was furious, "What do you mean you're not coming? This is a family tradition, Layla. You can't just skip it because you're having one of your moods." I took a deep breath and said something I had never said before. "I'm not coming because being around this family hurts me, and I'm choosing to protect my mental health instead of pretending everything is fine." She hung up on me without another word, and within an hour I had angry text messages from Emma calling me selfish, and from Daniel asking why I always had to make everything about me and create drama. Setting that boundary felt terrifying and liberating at the same time, like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below to catch my fall. I spent Thanksgiving that year with Jessica and her family, people who had always treated me with more kindness and acceptance than my own blood relatives ever had. And it was the first holiday meal where I didn't spend the whole time feeling anxious and inadequate. Jessica's mom, Helen, asked me about my job and actually listened to my answer. Her dad, Tom, told jokes that made everyone laugh, including me, and when they took family photos after dinner, they insisted I be in them, right there in the center of the frame. When I saw those photos later, I cried because there I was, visible, included, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. It was proof that the problem had never been me, that I was capable of belonging and being loved, just not by the people who should have loved me first. But breaking away from toxic family ties isn't a one-time decision. It's a series of decisions you have to make over and over again as they try different tactics to pull you back into the dysfunction. My mother went through phases of trying to guilt me into contact, sending me long emails about how much she had sacrificed for me and how ungrateful I was being, how family was supposed to stick together no matter what. When guilt didn't work, she tried manipulation, telling me that my grandmother was asking about me and disappointed that I wasn't coming around anymore, using other family members as weapons to make me feel like the bad guy. My siblings joined in too, with Emma posting passive-aggressive things on social media about how some people abandon their families when things get hard, and Daniel calling me occasionally to lecture me about how I was tearing the family apart with my selfishness. Each time they reached out, I had to make the conscious choice to maintain my boundaries and not let them drag me back into their toxic pattern. And every time I held firm, I got a little bit stronger and a little bit more convinced that I was doing the right thing. Even though I knew intellectually that I was making the right choice by distancing myself from my family, the emotional reality was much more complicated and painful than I had expected. There were nights when I would lie awake wondering if maybe I really was the problem, if maybe I was being too sensitive or holding grudges that I should just let go of for the sake of family harmony. The conditioning from childhood ran so deep that even after learning about the affair and my mother's guilt-driven abuse, part of me still wanted to believe that if I could just be better or different somehow, they would finally love me the way I had always craved. That little girl inside me who had spent her whole childhood trying to earn her parents' approval was still there, still hoping that maybe this time if I reached out they would apologize and everything would magically be fixed. The guilt was overwhelming sometimes, especially around holidays and family milestones when society tells you that you're supposed to be with your blood relatives no matter what. When Emma announced her pregnancy on social media, and I saw all the excited comments from family members, I felt a stab of sadness knowing I would probably never meet my niece or nephew, never be part of those important moments. When I heard through Aunt Carolyn that my grandmother had been asking about me and didn't understand why I wasn't visiting anymore, I felt terrible knowing that my boundary with my parents was affecting my relationship with her too. The societal pressure to forgive and maintain family connections is so strong, and people who haven't experienced this kind of abuse don't understand why you can't just get over it or be the bigger person. Friends would tell me that life was too short to hold grudges, that family was everything, that I would regret cutting them off when they were gone. But every time I wavered and considered breaking my boundary, I would pull out my journal and read through the years of documentation I had kept about their treatment of me. The criticism, the exclusion, the gaslighting, the systematic erasure from photos and memories. I would remember how small and worthless they had made me feel, how I had struggled with depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts, because I had internalized their message that I was unlovable and defective. I would think about the research I had read about how emotional abuse can be even more damaging than physical abuse, how children who grow up as family scapegoats carry those wounds into every aspect of their adult lives. And then I would remember the woman I was becoming in their absence, stronger, healthier, more confident, more capable of genuine relationships. And I knew that no temporary moment of guilt or loneliness was worth sacrificing the peace and freedom I had fought so hard to claim. The internal struggle was real and it was brutal. But on the other side of that struggle was a version of myself that I had never been allowed to be. And she was worth fighting for. Starting therapy was one of the scariest and most important decisions I ever made because it meant finally admitting out loud to a stranger that my family had broken something fundamental inside me, and I needed help putting the pieces back together. I found a therapist named Dr. Sarah Chen who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. And in our first session when I told her the whole story, the photo exclusion, the emotional neglect, the affair, the scapegoating, she looked me in the eyes and said, "Layla, what happened to you was not your fault, and you deserved so much better." I burst into tears right there in her office because it was the first time in my entire life that someone with authority and expertise had validated my pain and confirmed that yes, what I had experienced was real abuse and not just me being dramatic or oversensitive. If you're on your own healing journey from family trauma and you want to hear how I rebuilt myself from the ground up, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because your healing matters and you deserve to reclaim the life that was stolen from you. What would it mean to you to finally heal from the wounds your family inflicted? Therapy taught me that healing isn't linear. It's a messy, complicated process full of setbacks and breakthroughs, good days and terrible days, moments of clarity and moments of doubt. Some weeks I would feel strong and confident, ready to take on the world and leave my past behind me. And then something would trigger me, a social media post from my mother, a friend mentioning their loving family, a holiday approaching, and I would spiral back into grief and anger and self-doubt. Dr. Chen helped me understand that these setbacks were normal and didn't mean I was failing at healing. They were just part of the process of rewiring decades of toxic programming and learned helplessness. We worked on identifying my negative self-talk patterns, the internal voice that sounded suspiciously like my mother telling me I wasn't good enough or pretty enough or worthy enough. Every time I caught myself thinking those thoughts, I learned to challenge them and replace them with truths. I am worthy of love exactly as I am. My value doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. I deserve to take up space and be seen. One of the most powerful parts of my healing journey was learning to reparent myself, to give myself the unconditional love and acceptance and encouragement that my parents had failed to provide. I started small, celebrating my accomplishments no matter how minor they seemed, treating myself with kindness when I made mistakes instead of harsh criticism, allowing myself to feel my emotions without judgment. I bought myself flowers just because. I took myself out to nice dinners. I spoke to myself in the mirror with words of affirmation and love. It felt silly and awkward at first, but gradually I started to internalize a new narrative about myself, one where I was the hero of my own story, not the victim or the scapegoat, but a survivor who had fought her way through trauma and come out stronger on the other side. I also started building my chosen family, surrounding myself with people who could love me healthily and authentically, people like Jessica and Dr. Chen, and new friends I met through support groups and therapy. The healing process transformed me from a broken woman who couldn't look at herself in photos into someone who finally understood that her worth had never been determined by her family's inability to see it. And that transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Looking back now from where I stand today at 34 years old, I can honestly say that being excluded from those family photos was the worst thing that ever happened to me, because it was the visible evidence I needed to finally see the invisible abuse I had been suffering my entire life. If my mother had been more subtle in her rejection, if she had included me in just enough photos to maintain plausible deniability, I might have spent the rest of my life trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it, slowly losing myself in the process. The photo exclusion was so blatant, so undeniable, that it forced me to confront the truth about my family and make the painful but necessary choice to save myself. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest, and that blood relation doesn't automatically make someone family. Family is built through love and respect and mutual care, not through shared DNA. The journey from that devastating moment of scrolling through Facebook photos and realizing I had been erased to this moment right now where I can tell my story with strength and clarity has been the hardest thing I've ever done. I lost my family of origin, but I gained something infinitely more valuable. I gained myself. I learned to set boundaries and enforce them even when it hurt. I learned to trust my own perceptions instead of letting others gaslight me. I learned that I was worthy of love and belonging just as I am. I built a chosen family of people who celebrate me and include me and see me, and I learned to celebrate and include and see myself. I take photos now, so many photos, and I post them proudly on social media, reclaiming my right to be visible and exist fully in the world. Every selfie is an act of resistance against the erasure my mother tried to impose on me. Every group photo with friends is proof that I was never the problem, that I am capable of belonging and being loved. If you're reading this and you see yourself in my story, if you've been excluded or scapegoated or erased by your own family, I want you to know that it's not your fault and you're not alone. The choice to break free from toxic family dynamics is one of the hardest choices you'll ever make, and it will probably hurt like hell, but on the other side of that pain is a freedom and peace that you can't even imagine right now. You deserve to be in the picture, both literally and figuratively. You deserve to be seen and celebrated and loved for exactly who you are. You deserve to build a life where you're not constantly trying to earn approval from people who will never give it, where you can just exist and be enough. If this story resonated with you and you want to see more content about healing from family trauma and building the life you deserve, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because your story matters just as much as mine, and together we can break the cycle of generational trauma and abuse. What would your life look like if you gave yourself permission to be free? After hearing my story, what would you have done in my place? Would you have been able to walk away from your family? Or would you have kept trying to earn their love? I think about these questions a lot, and I know there's no easy answer because every situation is different and every person has to make the choice that's right for them. What's your take on family loyalty versus self-preservation? Do you believe we owe our families endless chances even when they hurt us? Or do we have the right to protect ourselves first? These are the questions that keep me up at night, the moral dilemmas that don't have clear solutions. But what I know for sure is that choosing myself over my family's dysfunction was the most loving thing I've ever done, not just for me, but for any future children I might have, because I'm breaking the cycle of abuse and refusing to pass it down to the next generation. If you want more stories like this, real, raw, unfiltered stories about betrayal and healing and finding yourself on the other side of trauma, make sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on family boundaries and whether you've ever had to make the difficult choice to distance yourself from toxic relatives. Your story matters, your voice matters, and this community is here to support you through whatever you're going through. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this journey with me. Remember, you are worthy of love, you deserve to be seen, and you have every right to protect your peace even if it means disappointing people who never prioritized yours. I'll see you in the next video. Stay strong, stay true to yourself, and never let anyone make you feel invisible again.